Hi, everyone. I'll just give it another couple of minutes to let some people in. I can see the numbers jumping up, so I'll give it a minute. Okay, everyone, I can see the numbers jumping up and starting to steady, so I will kick this session off. So welcome, everyone. How's everyone doing on this Wednesday? It's nearly the end of my day, and I know for the panelists who'll be joining me, it's very much the end of their day where they are based. So thanks so much for joining us for this session called Best Practices for Implementing a Technology-Empowered Procurement Process. Something I love talking about, anything to do with technology, anything to do with procurement. So I'm in my happy place with this. Moving on to the next slide, which is really about the housekeeping. Just to let you know that this is a recorded session, so it's always good to know that. And also for those that may miss this session, the recording can be accessed as well afterwards. I do hope you're already connected to audio, otherwise it's going to be a kind of interesting and not so interesting session for you. So hopefully you're connected already to the audio. And please use the chat window as well. There's a Q&A box for you in this Zoom recording. Love to get your questions, so please use that, or if you've got any difficulties, please chat those as well, and we'll see what we can do with the guys behind the scene. So that's the housekeeping kicked off, and moving on to our agenda slide. It's all about intros. I'll do a brief intro of me and a very brief intro of the panelists, because they'll introduce themselves a little bit later when we get into the panel discussion. I'll do a bit of talking around procurement priorities heading into 2022 and what we're seeing from an analyst organisation on my side. And some of the trends that we're seeing. And then the real meat of this discussion is the panel discussion. So I'll be asking a few questions to our esteemed panel on their thoughts around the topic of procurement and digitisation effectively. And then we'll go into Q&A. So as I've said, please throw some questions out at me, at us, and we'll answer as many as we can as we go. So moving on. I'll just say a quick hello from myself. So I'm Jenny and I am with Spend Matters. So I'm in the Spend Matters camp, which is, if you've not heard of us, please click on spendmatters.com. It doesn't cost anything to do that at all. And we give all of the latest and greatest on procurement technology and the ecosystem around procurement technology. I'm based in the UK, but our head offices are in Chicago, and we are an analyst and research company in that world of procurement and procurement tech. I'm joined as well by Toma and Bart, who will introduce themselves in a bit more detail later. From my side, I've got a track record in procurement and in procurement technology. If any of you are as old as me in the digital procurement world, you'll remember free markets, and free markets is my history effectively, and all the way through the sort of in the world of procurement and procurement tech. And I'm now like a kid in a candy store where I get to look at everybody's technology and see what's going on. So that's a great position for me to be in. And as I said, I'll get my colleagues on this webinar to introduce themselves a little bit later. So if I move on to the next slide, I just want to set the scene now. So set the scene for what's going to go on in 2022, as far as we see and the kind of information that we're getting in the discussions that we're having. So if we move on to a few little pieces of information and the trends that we are seeing, and all of this is backed up by a lot of data that we have. We do surveys with a lot of the management consulting organizations, a lot of the technology providers, and as well the practitioners, the buyers out there as well. So in terms of, I don't know, should I call it like a priority list of trends? Probably not, but some of them. Number one is that digital disruption. The supply market in terms of technology is really opening up. And I'll make some references through my next couple of slides in terms of where we see the world of business to commerce meeting business to business. So Amazon, we all know Amazon, love it, hate it. It provides our needs. It is now providing our needs for business to business as well. We might know them as a marketplace, but make no mistake, their power and their reach is growing throughout into tail spend and beyond. We see the same with Office Depot, moving outside of the world of stationery. And again, other organizations that you might know for IT services and so on, really starting to gain ground across the P2P space and maybe even up into the strategic procurement. They see this as a real hotbed to leap on the toes of some of the big providers already out there. So this is really a time of disruption. Remember when Cooper came on the scene? Well, we're starting to see that kind of disruptor market again now. So that's one trend that we're starting to see, and we're being flagged up to as well at Spend Matters. Everything as a service, the SaaS model, including a platform as a service, everything has become a service. I think this has been happening for some time, but it just is so easy now to create apps, to create technology on a platform and to interlink that we're just seeing that plug and play with us as a service everywhere we go. Again, that world of commerce as a consumer, moving into the world of business again. New models, number 3. I'm not sure that these are new models. I've put new models, but I remember a time when shared centers of excellence, shared services were a real thing in the 1990s, and they're coming back. So this grouping of excellence, sharing that, whether it's a physical center together or a global center where people are considered part of a center of excellence, we're really starting to see that model coming back in again. You know, those business models, the digital business strategy I talk about, master services provider. So again, from the 1990s when these things were quite popular and then they faded out, we're seeing a lot more around that master service provider market. And again, RPA, robotic process automation, just moving everything into a world where we are as automated, and we are automating tactical things as much as possible to then focus on the strategic stuff. Moving on to a couple more, I'll move a little bit faster to a certain extent. Digitization, the CIO, digitization, and the CPO. I think I love this one because when I see CPO is externalization in number 4, we're talking about the chief purchasing officer being more visible outside of their own function. They are much more visible at board level and within an organization, given the context of the pandemic and how important procurement has become. But also as well on a global stage, we all know and we read in our newspapers online around supply chain issues and difficulties, and that all points back to CPOs. So that has really raised that profile. Value beyond PPV, so beyond the purchase price variance. Absolutely, it's procurement now is much more about the strategy around supply chain, around securing supply, rather than just what price you're paying for something. So that is really, and the risk of course associated with that, that's really a highlight. I'm sure many of you on this webinar are seeing that as well. Going for the high-hanging fruit. So we've all heard the term low-hanging fruit and sort of, you know, try and tackle those. Now people are doing some really creative things around high hanging fruit, those complex strategies. And they're doing that, thankfully, with supplier innovation and with working with their suppliers as well, in terms of how they tackle the high hanging fruit and what can they do to re-engineer, to innovate in terms of their supply chain. Supply chain, SXM, supply chain management. So much more focus on that. If we look from a technology perspective, where are people buying technology? They're buying it to fill gaps in accounts payable, but they're also hugely buying in terms of supplier relationship management and supplier management. I don't really like to say supplier management because you're not managing your suppliers, you're collaborating with them. And that really is the new way of working with your supply base, which leads me on to number 8. It's all about collaboration internally and externally. And number 9, digitize thyself. So everything that we're seeing is moving much more digital. I've got a few more to run through in the next slide, which I'll try and go through. But if you've ever heard me talk before, you'll know I talk a lot. I can't stop talking about some of this stuff. Number 10, everything's going really vanilla. People want to create an easy process. They want things that you don't have to be configured, don't have to be rolled out and trained, that their teams need to be trained. They want something that they can plug in and it works straight away. So that plays very happily to that vanilla model. And again, to that consumer tech. That's what we see in our home lives, don't we? And we want to see that exact same experience. We've talked about it for ages, but it is actually starting to happen now in a lot of these areas. I think an interesting one here is tail spend management. It's not the sexy thing, is it? Remember, sourcing was all hype and sexy and doing reverse auctions and so on. And people didn't want to talk about tail spend because it was low value, it's administration. And this is really where a lot of the focus in terms of gaining that efficiency, gaining control of that tail, which for some organizations has become uncontrollable to a certain extent. So it's really getting hold of that now and the technologies around it. Here's an interesting one. I don't know what your organizations are doing, but suite versus best of breed. We are seeing the best of breed model really overtaking the suite play, actually. People are going for what they, solving a problem that they have in their procurement process and the technology that is right for that specific problem. So that's been an interesting shift, I think, from several years ago. Empty apps, what do we mean when we say empty apps? Empty apps is when you buy a technology and effectively it is a business model, it is a process that you've not got any information under yet that is personal to your organization. So people are really looking for moving beyond a process that you get when you buy a technology, because it's a workflow at the end of the day, and actually making sure that that fits their need as well and it fits their data underneath that. Opportunities as well, really looking beyond the sourcing of an opportunity. We're talking about guiding. I'll go through sort of 16 guided. Everybody wants that easy consumer kind of feel in terms of how they are guided through sourcing, how they are guided through contracting. And we're seeing a lot more of that in technology. AI, you can imagine AI is everywhere, along with RPA, and making sure that it's easy to make strategic and tactical decisions because the information is brought from you from the wider web and also from your own organizations to give you information and data to make decisions. It's everywhere now. And embracing complexity, definitely seeing that, as well as job security. It's a crazy job market at the moment, and people know that they can add value in their organizations, and we're seeing that, and we're seeing their profile being raised in procurement. Moving on to the next slide, where we actually see a few of the challenges. Here's top one, and I don't know if this applies to you in terms of the attendee list. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts about your own organization as well. CIO bias towards ERPs and business intelligence rather than best fit procurement technologies. So they will go for, CIOs will go for, well, it's easy. We don't want too many different technologies. So we're just going to go for a big ERP that's got a procurement arm on it, and that will do you. So there is always that battle. It's been going on for a long time. They want to simplify. Us in procurement, we want the best fit technology for, as I said before, for the job that we need to do. Quality of data, age-old problem, poor master data management and integration. We talk about agile. We've probably all been on webinars where agile has been in the topic. Agile is great and being as efficient and effective as possible, but behind that is great data, and you need great data to be agile, and that is still a problem for many organizations, collecting that data. Where is the master data? So it's still the problem, as is tactical tyranny, we like to call it. So again, vendor master data management, supplier enablement. It's all right having all the technology in the world that can do everything. And if your teams can do everything, but unless you bring the suppliers on board with your journey, and that they will embrace what you're doing and what you're trying to achieve with your technology, you've got a problem. Again, similar with category spend and fragmented category solutions as well. It's bringing all that together. We talk about, and what we're seeing as well, is the mega vendors and the ecosystems. A little bit like I said earlier on with regards to, are you going to go big suites, or are you going to go best of breeds? So it's about creating those ecosystems and buying organizations knowing what technologies they can put next to each other and that they will all work, rather than just going for the easy, or well, I'll just buy from one solution provider. So that's still an issue for organizations. It's about understanding and gaining that knowledge, I think. I talked earlier about empty apps, vendor noise, and market volatility. It is there. There is a lot of disruption still in the market, and we see it all the time. And for us, it's exciting because we see new players, we see new things happening, we see acquisitions happening. But at the same time, for those who are buying technology, it can be quite disruptive. So there's a few little snippets from me. I'm just going to go on to a little bit of data for the next slide, which is about enterprise priorities from a CPO view. We take this data, Spend Matters is very fortunate to do a survey with Deloitte, and we interview with Deloitte over 400 CPOs. So there might well be some of you on the attendee list here who have taken part in a Deloitte survey. So a couple of observations. I won't concentrate too much, but if you look at the key here, the lighter colour is the survey for the question from 2021, so the responses, and the darker purple is from 2019. Deloitte asked the same questions and maybe had a couple of questions as well in each of their surveys, so you can start to see a relative change as to how the market is moving and how opinions are moving. I think one of the biggest things, and I said this a few months ago when these results came out, is brand new as a priority for CPOs is driving operational efficiency. And that is the number one objective of CPOs. 78% of people said that is their number one priority, driving operational efficiency. It always used to be about cost and reducing cost. It's still there, but it's going down in terms of priorities. And I think another area that is really moved, that is brand new again, is innovation and looking to innovate to find better alternatives in terms of supply chain. That very often goes hand in hand with an ESG, a sustainable strategy, and looking to innovate there with the suppliers. So when I look at this, I actually see some really good news in terms of where people are starting to look in terms of their priorities and where they're moving from just being a let's reduce our cost base procurement organization. So I just wanted to bring some of those to your attention before I move on to the panel discussion, which is the more topical thing and what we want to move to now. So on this, if we move to the next slide, where we have the details again of our presenters, I'd really kindly like to ask Toma and then Bar to introduce themselves and your background, and then I'm going to ask you two a couple of questions. So Toma, would you say hi and just give us a bit of information about yourself?
Hello, guys. Thank you. Thank you, Jenny. My name is Tomer Gamliel Durian, and you can see my virtual background. I'm currently the Vice President Global Supply Management at Cybereason, Inc., a US company with different entities all around the world. I'm located in Tel Aviv, and among other things, I own procurement, facilities, travel, and vendor compliance. And by the way, Jenny, if I need to address one of the issues you just raised, we actually had a debate at Cybereason about the my org's name, because it's currently Global Supply Management. It used to be procurement, but since we're doing a bunch of stuff, we picked that name because I think it covers lots of areas. I've been with the company for about 2 years now. Prior to that, I was the Global Vice President of Procurement at Mavenir Systems, Inc., formerly known as Comverse, now headquartered in the US also. And apart from that, I'm also a certified lawyer. And I think that, it helps me a lot in negotiating deals.
I imagine. Wow. That is a great introduction. Thank you. I'm excited. We've talked about the questions to ask on this, Toma, but we've not really delved into any responses. So I'm really keen to get your perspectives from all the hats that you wear. Bar, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Bar Winkler. I'm currently the GM of procurement at Tipalti, which isn't really a procurement role. What I really do is I lead the team that develops the procurement part of Tipalti's software offerings. We are actually now hiring a real procurement manager in the US. Before this role, I was the co-founder and CEO of Approve.com, which was a PR to PO software that was acquired by Tipalti earlier in 2021. That's also how I know Tomer. So Tomer and Cybereason were amongst our early customers. Before that, I worked at a company called Iron Source, which is now a public company, pretty big. I joined them when they were like 30 employees and left when they were over 1,000. So I experienced the hyper growth that a lot of Tipalti's customers are experiencing. And I did some product and biz dev roles over there.
Fantastic. I'm really interested in both of your responses to a few questions that we've developed. Thank you, Bar. So I've got some questions here, and I'm going to probably start, Toma, with you on my first question. So just to bear in mind, remember what the title of this is. This is about best practice for implementing a technology-empowered procurement process. And I always like to remember that when I'm asking the question, so we get the context right. So Toma, to you, where to start? What are the key drivers that make a function leader, a procurement function leader, realize that they need a gear change in their digital strategy?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, it's quite easy because and I can tell you about the Cybereason story, if you will. When I had joined the company like 2 years ago, the company never had any requisition approval system. We couldn't even cut POs to our providers. So, and again, I'm coming from a company, my previous employer has now almost 4,000 employees all around the world. It used to be a public company. Now it went private, and it's going to go back to be a public company. But nothing can be left for a human error. We have to have automations all the time because automations work. And if we want to go public, and Cybereason wants to become a public company at some point, we have to be SOX compliant. We have to make sure that we have internal controls in place, who gets to approve what, when, how, thresholds, and we revisit the systems all the time. So I'll take another example, renewals. Why do I need to keep spreadsheets to remember when an agreement is going to be renewed? We're using Salesforce for that matter, and we're getting email alerts in a timely manner. And we decide if we're getting those alerts within 30, 40, 60 days, whatever. We have everything that we need, systems to support the growing needs, especially with Cybereason. When I had joined Cybereason was only 590 employees worldwide, and now we're about 1,500. And it's less than 2 years. And throughout 2022, we're expecting to double ourselves. So if I don't have a system that can serve the needs of the company, and it's not just a system, systems, then it's just impossible to make it happen.
Yeah. And so is that kind of the journey that you had with your company now, in terms of when is the time to go digital? Was it like, listen, if we've got ambition and we want to move, we need to make sure, number one, that we're compliant, but also that we're efficient and so on. Was that a tipping point for you?
Exactly. And I can tell you that our management had a learning curve, because when they thought about procurement, they thought about, procurement in the old days. And when I started having the discussions with them, they immediately noticed that I'm a disruptive person. That is, I came here to make a change. So I need the tools, if you will, to make that change. I need the support, I need the funds, and I need the systems.
Yeah, brilliant.
And I'm happy to say that they have acknowledged that, and the entire company sees the advantage and the added value.
That's an interesting story, and I think a lot of people, on this call are at that tipping point in terms of, making that investment and how they can sell that to the board. So that's really interesting personal experience as well. Thank you, Toma. Bar,
Sure.
Anything to add from your role, who helps customers in this way, and where you see from your customers, sort of where the gear change needs to be?
Yeah, so I actually come across this quite often, because we see prospects and companies all the time that are looking to answer this question exactly. So usually I see that the pressure to make a technological or technology-based change comes from either, like Tomer mentioned, a new senior person that is hired, and he's like, whoa, like whatever we have here is not going to scale, it's not going to work. So if you want me to take responsibility over this, huge budget and very fast growing budget, then I need tools and systems in place, because otherwise it's just going to break. Before this person comes, it's very hard for people to make this kind of statement, because it's hard for them to get the support needed to change core workflows within the organization. So I think we see this very, very often with this like new executive hire that is like, right, we're changing gears and this is how we work from now on.
Yeah.
Oftentimes you see that the pressure to deploy technology comes from like external events, like for example, the need to raise a very big funding round and show the investors that you have better controls in place, or going public, for the same reasons, opening new offices around the world, becoming a multinational company. Those things make control and visibility and process mandatory, and it's really impossible to scale without them. So that's the main drivers that we see.
Interesting. Yeah, that's I'm sure there's many people can identify with that. Thank you, Bar. I'll move on to question number 2. And Bar, this is straight back at you. You're next up. What are the practical steps to take to switch out or augment and enhance the tech landscape that you already have in place. So what would practical next steps be for people if they want to augment or change?
Well, so I could never find this piece of paper or online piece of paper that I read a year or like 18 months ago that says that vast majority of the procurement projects within organizations actually fail. Means it's very hard to successfully deploy a procurement process. And when I'm saying procurement process, I mean mostly an internal process, right? Something that changes how your employees buy and approve the purchasing of goods and services. So based on what I've seen, whenever it works, it always looks something like this. You have a pretty strong steering committee that is led by someone who's able to implement and make changes, right? It can be as high as the CFO, or it can be someone that reports to the CFO and has like the CFO has their back. And you really have to have this executive support, because this process is going to change the way people work today, and people don't love changes, you know, even if it's for the best. So once you have the needs defined and you have the support of upper management, I see that establishing a small team, like a steering committee with very, very clear dates and KPIs for each date. For example, we have 3 weeks to research the market, right, based on an initial analysis, and see what products are out there that can support our needs. Also, those companies look inside, right? They see what tools they have today, right? It's always it's a procurement person or finance person's instinct to first look at what tools we've already purchased and see whether or not we can leverage those for solving the problems we have. So that's kind of like an internal and external analysis that's usually done via a steering committee. And once you've decided on a partner, be it an external new partner or an existing partner, I think it's very important to put this project on the forefront of the department and the company. Like, it's got to be at the level of the CEO, right? To send updates about it and enforce it and make sure that after it was declared, it's happening on time, because it's so easy in today's world to lose priority, right? You have a new crisis coming up every few months nowadays, right? It's very easy to just put things on the back seat. And in the case of a procurement process, it's really important to give it the proper time, because once it will be in place, it will be key in ensuring the company can grow and saving the company hopefully millions in dollars and wasted time. But that's what I see works best.
I agree. I think that executive sponsorship, that senior leadership buy-in, I think is absolutely key. Toma, anything to add? Is that your experience? Anything else to add there?
Yes, that's my own experience, because procurement sometimes is perceived as, you know, the break rather than the make, the organization that, you know, stops people. Why do you need like 2 or 3 weeks to negotiate an agreement before you came along? We just signed the agreement within a day, and now, you know, because of you, things get stuck. So I agree with Bar. Sometimes it's very hard for people to adjust to a change, but it's a matter of maturity. Every company needs to mature, and it has to start with the senior management team, because, you know, I can do whatever I want, I can be whomever I want to be, but if I don't have the sponsorship of our executive team, then it's going to be very hard.
Yeah, and funding.
Yeah, we actually one last thing that I want to add to that, like a very specific example that we've had with one of our customers. It's a very big software company that deployed Approve as a PO system with NetSuite when they were relatively large already. They were like over 1,000 people, and at first it was very hard for the procurement team to enforce people to use the system. And then suddenly we saw the usage suddenly spiked up, you know, from a very like a few dozens POs a month to like hundreds and hundreds. And we saw that it was the CFO who sent an email to the entire organization with the title "No PO, no pay." Like from today on, if you don't have a PO on your invoice, you're just not going to get paid. And it just caused the usage to go up. And obviously this company has since grown, acquired more companies, went public. I think it would have been very hard for them to do so without having a PO process. So sometimes you just have to go this route, especially in big organizations.
Simple but effective measure. I agree if that comes from the CFO. Thank you both for that. Next question, Tomer. I'll come to you first here, but I'm interested in both of your thoughts on this. You know, we talk about people, we talk about process, we talk about technology. What comes first? People, process, or technology when you're looking to make this procurement process re-engineered? Tomer, over to you.
So it's a hard question, but you know what? I would start with people, because you have to work with people, you have to hire the talented people, and you have to convince other people that you need to put a process in place and buy the technology. Yeah. So it always involves people, right? Yeah. And once you've identified, you know, your internal stakeholders, the ones that are controlling the budget, and for me, it's quite easy because I report directly to the CFO of the company. So he holds the budget, and my colleague, VP of IT, is a great supporter of technologies and systems. So it's quite, it was fairly easy. I didn't even have to convince them, but it starts with people.
Yeah, I agree. And that's up and down the chain. It's getting buy-in, getting the senior stakeholders, but also getting, you know, the function managers on board as well. So I agree with that. And then making the change. Bar, anything to add there?
No, I think well, it's a very hard question to answer because those things are very well connected, right? But I would definitely say it's a mistake to start with a system before you have a well-defined process, because otherwise you're going to end up making changes and redeploying the same tool 10 different times, and that's going to cause frustration with the people. And I think organizations have styles and cultures, and the processes that they have should be aligned with the styles and cultures that they have in place. But definitely I would choose the system after I have at least a well-defined or a wishful process in place, right? And then you can start looking for a tool that supports this. It's never going to be exactly what you want because it's hard to make software that is, you know, 100% of what everybody wants. But I would definitely say it's good to first sit with the people, define the process, and then go and look for the tools that support it.
I'd agree. I think some people let the technology lead the process. And I think, you know, there are technologies out there that can work with your processes and your workflows. And I'd always say, you know, you've got to work with what your organization represents, who you are as an organization and what your processes are, and then work with the people to define that, the teams to define that, and then make sure that the technology can handle the process that you have. So yeah, really good answers. I suppose part B of that question would be, how do you align those key elements, the people, the process, and the technology to make things happen? Tomer, what's your experience been in aligning all of those to make sure everything is in place to be successful?
So first of all, I need to identify the needs. My needs, the company's needs, and it has to support the company's operations. So once I have that plan in place, and I'm talking about, you know, my own experience. So what I did at Cyber Reason, I put a plan. I've shared it with, you know, a few execs, the relevant execs. It was the CEO, the COO, and the CFO. And together with our general counsel, because we're talking about compliance as well. Yeah. And I had previous relations with general counsel. He was the one who brought me into Cyber Reason. So we used to work together. So he knew where I was coming from, and he was a great supporter. So it was quite easy to convince our management that that's actually the business plan for procurement for the coming year. We had like 4 major items that we needed to execute. One of them was, like the engagement with then approved now Tipalti. The onboarding process was fairly quick. I met with Bar's sales guy in Israel, in Tel Aviv, and it was fairly quick. I was enthusiastic. I said to myself, yes, that's the tool I want. We started the discussions. Then we started the onboarding process at Cybereason, and for a cybersecurity company, it's not that easy, by the way, but it was fairly quick and we did it. So it has to start with a plan, a business plan, and execution. And, if there are hurdles or troubles along the way, we have to revisit, but at the end of the day, we have to execute.
Love it. Bar, anything to add there?
No, I completely agree. I think maybe one small thing to say, because I don't know if Tomer will complement himself, but I think Tomer did a good job in delegating some of the implementation to a procurement manager that worked closely with Tomer, and she was fantastic in pushing this project, both internally and externally, as in with my team. And this is really so important, because a lot of times you see that you have like a senior buyer that helps choose the software, negotiate the terms, and then once the contract is signed, they suddenly take a step back, and you're left with a relatively junior person that has to now deploy a process. And this junior person, it's not that they don't want things to succeed, right? It's harder for them to understand the difference between a blocker or something we can live with. It's hard for them to enforce change within the organization, and this can cause the leaders, right, to step in only when there's a crisis, and this can really stall the deployment of a solution, not only approve, I think, any software. So it's very important to have strong, seasoned people that lead those implementations, especially when we're talking about an internal workflow tool that's going to affect the way a lot of people, including senior leaders, work, right? You're going to need someone who can argue with the VPs that are used to a different process. And this someone has to be experienced, strong. It's not a junior's role, I think, to deploy a core process, be it a procure to pay or a quote to cash or whatever process we're talking about. I think a lot of people overlook it and they try to throw those deployments on people who are more junior. And I really think this sets them up to fail. And I see this a lot.
That is a really good point, actually, is having the right implementation person leading this, and and sort of being there almost from the beginning all the way through, and not just doing this internally, but being the liaison engagement manager, if you like, with the technology provider, to make sure that, that person is the central cog to make it, to have a successful deployment. That kind of leads me on to a question I had in terms of being able to realize value from implementing a tech empowered process, if you like. How quickly, and perhaps this is based on your experience, Tomer, I'll start from you with you first of all. How quickly can organizations start to realize the value from a tech empowered process in your experience?
At Cybereason, it was fairly quick, because we onboarded the approved system in January of this year.
Yeah.
And then I communicated it to the entire company, and we had user guides, and then we had training sessions with, the relevant people and the internal stakeholders. And then I also sent another communication together with my colleague, the VP of accounting, about the need and the necessity to raise requisitions before we engage with a vendor or execute an agreement. And when we drafted the PO itself, the document itself says that there is a note in the PO to the supplier: hey, if you do not have a PO, you won't get paid. Yeah. So it made suppliers go back to all the marketing people, IT people, salespeople, and they told them, we have a note from Cybereason that unless we get the PO, we're not able to start working with you guys. So it was kind of interesting because, again, Cybereason was founded in 2012, and some of my colleagues have been there ever since, or, you know, for 4, 5, 6 years, and they were kind of used to the startup nation. And the maturity process for some of them is difficult, and that's okay. It's part of the process, right? But at the end of the day, we were there, we were present, we made them understand why we need to have it. And it wasn't just us, it was management, because every month we have like between 1 to 2 global hands meeting with the CEO and our management team. And they're talking about the need to mature, the need to mature in our processes, in our systems. That's why we're having, you know, sessions with the big 4, the KPMGs and the PwCs, especially. I'm part of the finance team. So especially, you know, when it comes to our own processes, we have to be, and we have to act as if we are a public company now. So the procurement process needs to follow. And you know, when you bring in senior people who have the experience, it's easier.
Yeah, agreed. I love that. Bar, anything to add there in terms of realizing value? And I suppose I'm asking you from the implementations that you have done with your customers.
Well, realizing value, it's a hard question to ask, right? If you ask me, the ROI on a proper procurement system is in the thousands and thousands of percents, because we're talking about a pipe through which, you know, dozens of millions of dollars flow through every year, right? I think it's enough to just put this extra couple pair of eyes on it. You know, people like Tomer or his team, the fact that they're able to get involved earlier in the process, this alone, I think, can save the company millions in the long term in better negotiations, in avoiding rogue spend. But an ROI can be perceived not only as cost savings, because many organizations that deploy a procurement process don't really think in terms of cost savings, because they often even don't have a procurement person in place. I think sometimes they're looking at it from a time savings and efficiency standpoint. So I think if you have, for example, if you have 1,000 POs a year, right, which is a relatively small number, and every PO, and you don't have a PO process today, this means you have 1,000 processes that are happening today on email, spreadsheet, Slack, phone, WhatsApp, you name it, right? If you aggregate the time that is wasted in all the different touch points in each one of those processes, it's very easy to reach a conclusion that you save a lot of hours by deploying a streamlined automated tool. And the time it takes to manually, like what Tomer said earlier, you know, people are always going to make mistakes. Well, I agree with that. And I think the data agrees with that. If you try and open a PO in NetSuite manually, one time, you're probably not going to have a problem. 1,000 times, you're going to have a few mistakes. Those mistakes will take hours and hours to fix and uncover. So
really good point. Really good point. Sorry, Bar.
Oh no, I think the ROI is pretty quick. I think you asked before about how long it takes on average to deploy or start seeing. So I think that question goes back to the people versus process question that we asked before. Many times we see customers that buy the tool, right? And then it can take them a year to just get the buy-in to start using it, right? They go through the implementation process, they design the process, they spend time and effort and energy, but because they don't have the alignment from their people on this new process, they're not able to deploy. So I think it's very much dependent on the mindset and the seniority of the people who are in charge of this process within the organization. In the case of Cybereason, for example, it wasn't a choice, right? It was a decision that was made on an executive level, and it needs to be deployed and enforced. So it was much easier for them to do it properly and start seeing results faster. And that's what I would encourage every organization that wants to go through this change to do.
It goes back to the operational efficiency stats that I mentioned from the survey that we did, that has come in as the #1 priority, the efficiency. And I think that's what really does, so that's what technology can do, is make a process and people much more efficient with their time, so they can get on with things that are far more important in terms of strategy and so on. So I totally agree. I love the example of, if you've got 1,000 POs a year, a small number, but there's X percentage of issues on them, then that is a lot of time wasted. I love that example. I'm going to finish with a question before I hand over to a couple of questions that we've got from the audience. But it's an important question I want to ask. If you have any tips for organizations who are joining this webinar because they say, well, I'm in this position where, do I start looking at technology to help my procurement function and my process? Have you got any tips for those people that know they need to change, but they're unsure where to start? Tomer, I'll go to you first.
Well, first of all, just do it. Second, if they don't know where to start, so it's always best to consult with colleagues who have the experience. Yeah. So because, whatever I do or whatever I face, other people face it as well. Whether it's, senior management team who doesn't understand it, or if they do not want to put the money to buy the system, or if people resist the change, because on the one hand, we want to be, very close to our colleagues and peers and not to be battling with them all the time. But on the other hand, we have a job, we have a responsibility. We have to enforce a policy and new processes, and it's tough. It's not easy, but it is what it is. Mm-hmm. So that's what I would say.
I like it. I'm sure you took that little logo from somewhere, they just do it. But I agree. Bar, anything to add there in terms of tips for people starting on this, knowing they need to make a change? Where do they start?
Well, yeah, it's a great question, and we can go on and on about how I think is the right way. I think it depends on where this company is at right now. If they try to deploy a process in the past and failed, they definitely need to look into why it failed before they retry, right? Because it can be because there wasn't enough executive support, because the right people didn't get involved, because the tools that were chosen were not the right ones. So I would say, yeah, just do it. I agree, right? Get into it, but define what happened before. And if it's the first time you're trying to deploy a PO process, then 100% I would do what Tomer said. I would find similar companies, right? Companies that are similar in the industry, in the headcount, in the trajectory, right? For example, if you're 100 employees right now, but you just raised a $200 million funding round, and you're going to be 500 people in 2 years, you need to talk with 500-person companies or 1,000-person companies, right? Because by the time you won't realize you'll be there. So yeah. Talk with companies in your space, and really put your own opinions aside for a second and consult. And then when you have this data from the outside, the real world, you'll suddenly see that you can avoid a lot of the obstacles. There's still going to be obstacles because every company is different, but at least you'll be able to have this network of people you can consult with and ask. I'm sure Tomer has dozens of people that reach out to him every now and then and ask him questions, and those people are smart to do it, because I'm sure when Tomer wasn't as experienced, he would do the same with other people when he's trying to deploy new process or enforce new policies in his organizations.
Love those answers. Thank you, chaps. They're my set questions, and I've got a few. We've probably got about 5 minutes left, so I've got about time for maybe 3 questions. I'm going to ask the first one here. I'm going to ask you, Tomer, this one, just because you've had the experience here. When is the right time to hire a procurement manager? I think there's people on this call that would call themselves small or mid-sized enterprises. And to a certain extent, procurement can, or procurement head can be a bit of a luxury, can't it? So when would you say is the right time to sort of flip that switch and go for a procurement manager?
Well, it's very hard to answer because at the end of the day, it depends on, you know, the volume, the scale of the spend. And I don't know, you know, if I can say if the vendor spend exceeds, let's say, $1 million a year or not. It just depends on, you know, where the company wants to be. And naturally, you know, if the spend is significant, then you would want to have somebody who has the experience and the knowledge. And I can tell you that when I started at Cybereason, and I wanted to start hiring people, I was offered to take, you know, existing employees. And I told my boss, no, you're insulting me because I'm going to hire professionals, not, you know, people from within the org who don't have the experience. But when it gets complicated,
yeah,
every company needs to have a procurement lead, and depending on their seniority, naturally.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think, you know, when it starts to take over, when dealing with procurement matters starts to take a certain amount of your time, if you're a manager in another area, I think it's like, right, this needs to be somebody's focus and objective.
Right.
I'd agree there. I see, Bar, that you have answered a question online with somebody, so I'll go to one of our other questions as well. What are the 2 or 3 telltale signs of lacking a procurement process or lacking control over spending? Bar, I'm going to go to you first there because you've probably dealt with a few of these telltale signs of lacking a procurement process.
Well, I think the biggest telltale, the biggest sign, right? I'll skip the other word, is that you, as the procurement leader or finance leader, feel like you're working backwards. Like, for example, you're issuing a PO after the fact, meaning the vendor was already notified they won the deal. They might have even supplied the goods or services, and now you have to issue the PO where you have nothing to do about it, right? You can't negotiate, you can't lower the cost, you can't go, like, so you feel like a rubber stamp. I think this is a very, very classical telltale. How do you say it again?
Telltale
Sign that you need to deploy a process. I think when you're starting to have to look for like audit related things on email, like who approved this purchase that we did a year ago, right? Or who was the vendor that sold us those beautiful chairs that we want to get 100 more of? That's another sign that we see quite often, like the lacking of a database of who bought what, when, and why, and from who. And I think another sign is that you have like processes that are starting to affect I'm saying everyday employees, and are causing a lot of frustration and you know, cynical comments, right? If you're like a marketing person or an HR person or a salesperson that is saying, oh, it's impossible to onboard a vendor to this company, right? Then they may be exaggerating, but there may be something to what they're saying. It may be too hard on them. They may be feeling that it's slowing them down. I think those are 3 signs I can think of. I want to just take a moment and answer Eyal from the chat on his second question, because I started typing. So how does the system prevent these types of mistakes? Well, in Approve specifically, but in other PR to PO systems, the system itself generates the PO in the ERP or in the system, right? Depending on what the customer wants. And this PO is a result of a requisition that was approved by several different people. So you have not 2 eyeballs on it, but, you know, 8 or 10 or 12. And I think this really lowers the chance of a mistake, including people that can actually make changes on the requisition that will then change the PO. For example, changing the GL account, right? Many times we see someone entering a PO under the wrong budget account in their ERP, and then it needs to be changed after the fact. Or you know, I'm not even talking about worse things like wrong amounts, right? Or stuff like that, but those smaller things. And also the systems in place, you know, can alert you when you're trying to create a PO that is, for example, over budget, right? Or a PO that is to a vendor that hasn't yet been onboarded. Those things, I think, help prevent the majority of those issues. And again, we're talking just about technical issues, not life and death issues, but they are annoying and they can be avoided.
Correct. I think that's it. I think that is the role of technology, to get rid of a lot of those annoying problems. We are out of time. We're gone past the hour. So, and I know there's a couple more questions, but we'll try and either respond to those offline. First of all, let me thank Tomer and Bart for your wonderful insights. Thanks so much for taking the time. Tomer, particularly you've come as a customer, and you've given your valuable time and insights as well. It is much appreciated. And
My
Bart,
pleasure.
thank you so much. And Bar as well. Always really interesting to just know the kind of different experiences that you've had with your customers as well. So thanks for the honesty, both of you. And I'm going to wrap this session up. We look forward to any questions that you may have. And we hope that you've enjoyed the session and you found it useful. There will be a recording of this session coming out, so please do, if you need it, or if you can access it, we'll make sure it gets sent to you and your teammates as well. Thanks so much, and thanks to the panelists, and take care. Have a great rest of your Wednesdays, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.
Bye-bye.